Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Audible. If there's one thing I've really come to admire about the original Jurassic Park, especially after seeing the World trilogy, is how simple and efficient that movie is. Sure, it has a very high concept premise that requires a decent amount of exposition, but once that's out of the way, the stakes are clean cut and crystal clear. The themes that the movie explores are really broad and can be traced back to some of the oldest science fiction. A fear that meddling with nature and playing God will ultimately lead to death and destruction. It's not a very complex film, and it was never meant to be, but it was highly effective as both blockbuster spectacle and a sci-fi cautionary tale that pared down Crichton's novels to its essentials. You won't find that kind of clarity of purpose in Jurassic World Dominion, a movie that feels pulled in far more directions than it really has time for. There is some things to like here, and I'll try to mention them as I go along, but taken as a whole, if Jurassic World Dominion made me feel anything, it's just that movies like this need to rely far less on nostalgic pandering, if they ever wish to really stand on their own 2 feet. My favorite scene in Dominion comes very early, and sorry, I don't think the footage has been in the trailers or promotional videos, so I can't really show it here. It sees a dinosaur wander into a snowy logging site during the workday. Everyone stares up in silent wonder before the creature is peacefully led away by a guy holding a flare on the back of a truck. For a minute there, everything director Colin Trevorrow seemed to have an interest in exploring in this movie felt like it actually made it up there to the big screen. How dinosaurs fit into human society and whether it would be possible to coexist with them is a concept that the director has highlighted over and over again in interviews leading up to the film's release. It was also the focus of an interesting prologue for the film that was ultimately cut for time and now can only be seen online. That topic is what this movie seems to be begging to be about, but it's not. Not really. Sure, the film begins with a newscast about it and ends with a speech about it, but most of this movie is in no way an exploration of how people would adjust to this huge shift in life, but is instead just going through a checklist of things it needs to wrap up from the previous 5 movies. Bringing back most of the cast of the 1993 original, as well as trying to tie those characters in with the goofy plot developments of the previous World movie. At the end of the day, this film is far more about giant locusts disrupting crops in the American Midwest and human cloning than it is about man's relationship with dinosaurs. Which not only seems like an odd choice, but also feels like one made out of obligation rather than genuine interest, especially the locust plague plot, which functions as an excuse to get the original movie trio back in action and otherwise feels really perfunctory. The cloning plot, carried over from the baffling story decisions of Fallen Kingdom a few years ago, fares a little better, but in the end, it just ends up feeling like another underexplored idea in a movie full of them. But I should probably take a step back and talk about my feelings going into the film, because here's the thing. I haven't really liked any of these Jurassic World movies. I know the 2015 one was a huge hit and is beloved by a lot of people, but it always felt like a lazy retread with far less engaging characters to me. And those characters still feel that way. Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard are both charismatic actors who I've liked in a lot of other roles, but I don't think their Jurassic characters have ever added up to much. Especially for Pratt, it's easily my least favorite character of all the big movie franchises that he's been a part of. Now, I get that these are hardly character-driven movies, but at times it does feel like the films are trying to carve out an actual personality for them. Like early on in Dominion, we see Claire recklessly risk her life to save a baby dinosaur, only to have her friends tell her that she's being driven to do this by guilt. Having worked at Jurassic World, she's now trying to do right by creatures that they brought into existence. That's something. It's a potentially solid angle on this dull character. But then it's never really brought to the forefront again, as most of the movie locks her and Pratt into being concerned action parents and not much else. I won't blame the cast for the bland writing, because they were easily the highlight in the movie for me. Sure, it was nice to see Ellie, Alan, and Ian Malcolm together again, but even beyond them, I thought newcomer DeWanda Wise slipped into the cast nicely, and Isabella Sermon, as the clone kid, brought a lot more weight and emotion to that storyline than it probably deserved. The actors are not the issue here. I would say that some of the dinosaur set pieces work pretty well too, even if they ultimately just feel like echoes of scenes that we've seen so many times before. It's just that the storylines they decided to focus on were pretty weird. First, there's the Plague of Locusts. It's kind of an odd fit for one of these movies, but I get it. They wanted a big global threat to draw everyone together, and they didn't want it to be the dinosaurs' fault. But the long exposition scenes about locusts and food supply really slow the movie down, and the threat of a global food shortage never actually feels all that present. It's a little odd that it's not even played as a mystery either. It's established right away that this one company's crops are being left alone by the locusts. That's it. There's not much there to unravel. The outcome of this subplot is obvious from the moment it's introduced. Then there's the clone stuff. And I'm sorry, but this continues to just drag these movies down for me. The film goes so hard on the Lockwood lore, a character from the last movie played by James Cromwell, who they established as having started Jurassic Park along with John Hammond. I've never liked that retcon. It felt super contrived and forced in the last film, and they doubled down on it here, showing us a lot of his daughter Charlotte Lockwood, who gets the film's ending narration despite not being an actual character in any of these movies at all. In fact, I think by the end, they managed to make the cloning subplot less interesting. The kid being the result of a grieving, but also pretty terrible man who desperately wants to bring his daughter back to life wasn't exactly well executed in the last movie, but it's at least an interesting backstory for the character here. How can she reconcile trying to be her own person with the lab experiment she was created to be? That's basically all undercut here, as it turns out that Charlotte cloned herself and just had like a very normal pregnancy. What was a sloppy but kind of interesting dark storyline is smoothed over into something much more bland. Anyway, I should probably talk about our returning characters again. They're fun. Sure, it was always going to seem a little cynical in the Legacy sequel sort of way, but all three do get some really charming scenes together. The kind that we didn't really get out of like the new Star Wars trilogy. Laura Dern's clearly having a good time, and Jeff Goldblum predictably manages to punch up every scene he's in, which was really welcome in scenes where he's hanging out with a character as boring as Pratt's Owen. The villain fares a lot less well. He's technically from the first movie too. Lewis Dodgson, the guy who bribed Wayne Knight's character Dennis to get him to smuggle embryos in a shaving cream can, and served as the main villain in the Lost World book, though not the movie. In Dominion though, you wouldn't really know that's the same character apart from the fact that he still has the 30-year-old can of shaving cream, which, I'm sorry, I'm gonna nitpick here a little bit, but that does not make sense. Dennis died before delivering the canister, and it was buried under a ton of mud and being washed away in floodwater. How did Dodgson find it? Why does he still have it 30 years later when it serves no obvious purpose since the dinosaurs are everywhere on Earth now? Didn't they explicitly say in Jurassic Park that the embryos wouldn't live very long in the canister, giving Dodgson like a day to find it maybe? And if he kept it as a trophy, why? The plan was a total failure. I'm not sure why he'd have any sentimental feelings about this canister that gained him nothing. And most importantly, doesn't this whole thing kind of undercut a great moment in the original film, where Dennis's elaborate scheme adds up to nothing but a gruesome death in the jungle? The answer is, as far as I can tell, who cares? It's in the movie because they know we'd recognize it. The connection to the old film and novels aside, this just isn't a great character. He could have been. I actually think Campbell Scott is giving a really nervous, odd performance that always had me kind of sitting forward in my seat, but Dodgson never really gets to articulate his point of view. He seems like a riff on Apple CEO Tim Cook, which is a perfectly good starting point, but there's nothing else to the character. Even when his protege betrays him, we don't get any insight into this guy. He wanders around from plot point to plot point with the intention of doing evil, and that's about it.
Fire! That's when the big T-Rex got keyed off! Dino damage! Even the survival pod couldn't save us from his bone-crunching jaws!
Overall, there's just not much to recommend here. The Jurassic World series as a whole, while not without its moments, has never really worked for me, and this one definitely didn't change that. The director seemed genuinely interested in exploring this new dinosaur reality in interviews, but the vast majority of the movie turned out to be going through the motions on yet another science facility. What was once a simple and fairly elegant premise has now been driven down endless rabbit holes of retcons, secret clones, and forced references to previous entries. When it comes to Jurassic Park, I think it's time to give this series a long and probably permanent rest. Judging by the box office results, though, that's looking unlikely. Okay, I've been a little harsh on blockbuster movies today, so I really wanted to recommend an audiobook about an absolutely great one. Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, the wild and true story of Mad Max Fury Road. This was a great listen, and really brought into focus just how difficult the making of it was. If you're at all interested in film production, it's worth the listen. Of course, that's just one part of their massive library. The Audible catalog is always expanding, so there's something new to check out whether you're into biographies, self-help, fiction, and way more. Their Plus catalog goes beyond audiobooks and features great audio content in all sorts of formats. And one of the best parts, especially if you're in the car a lot, is that you can download and then listen to them whether your phone is online or not, which has really made it the ultimate road trip app. So get a free Audible credit now by going to audible.com/midnight or texting midnight to 500-500. That's audible.com/midnight or text midnight to 500-500.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.